On the 17th of February 1942, French art historian Agnès Humbert was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment and forced labor for her part in establishing the first known resistance group in German-occupied Paris. Agnès didn't know it then, but the 16 months she would spend at the rayon factory in Krefeld, nicknamed Reka, would ruin her health for the rest of her life. Rayon, another name for viscose, was the world's first chemically manufactured textile fiber, a dream that started in large parts because Western scientists theorized that it should be possible to produce silk synthetically, and in that way shake the monopoly on the luxury market held by China and the silk produced by the domestic silk moth, Bombyx mori. Today, viscose is everywhere, universally loved by its producers for being light, breathable, and of course, much cheaper than natural fibers. So ubiquitous is this fiber that it has garnered a large number of names. We've mentioned viscose and rayon already, but also modal, art silk, tencel, lyocell, bamboo viscose, and even cellophane. All fall under the umbrella term of regenerated cellulose fibers, so called for the various cellulose sources used as the raw material, with popular source materials including wood pulp, bamboo, and cotton. Producers also like to claim that viscose is green, because it's just cellulose, right? Nature knows how to decompose cellulose, so excellent sustainability ratings ensure. Or do they? But long before Agnès would take her first fateful steps into the rayon factory in Krefeld, it had to be invented. And I apologize for my pronunciation in advance. Theoretical musings can be traced all the way back to at least 1664, when Robert Hooke suggested that it may be possible to spin artificial fibers from a gummy solution of a wood pulp that resembled the secretions of silkworms. A similar theory was proposed by René de Réaumur in 1754, who reasoned that silk is only a liquid gum that has been dried, similar to varnishes and lacquers. So why would it not be possible to draw long threads from similar substances into silk-like fibers? 100 years later, George Adamars discovered that dipping a needle into a mixture of mulberry bark pulp and gummy rubber would produce threads that could be spun into artificial fibers, but it was far too slow to scale up. Many other scientists made attempts and progress, but none could find a method that would successfully scale to industrial production. And that was until Hilaire de Chardonnet, who, while working with Louis Pasteur to find a remedy for an epidemic that was killing French silkworms, came upon nitrocellulose by dissolving cotton in nitric acid. The resultant nitrocellulose could be dissolved in alcohol and ether, and after letting the mixture sit for a few days, it was forced through thin glass tubes and a long filament spun into yarn that could be woven into cloth. He patented his artificial silk in 1884 and presented it at the 1889 Paris exhibition. It wasn't long before they started selling it under the name of Chardonnet silk. There was only one slight problem, and the chemists among you might have spotted it already. The remnants of nitrocellulose in the mixture, also known as gun cotton, is highly flammable. It also readily dissolved in hot water, which, for clothes is not great. So it didn't take long before the original Chardonnet process was replaced and improved by a newer method involving more cleaning steps to ensure a product that was, and I quote, "in this state, the nitrocellulose is inflammable only to a slight degree." End quote. Other methods for developing viscose, or artificial silk as it was called around the turn of the century, cropped up to compete with the Chardonnet method, such as the copper ammonium method, which, while not as flammable, did struggle with being toxic. By the time Agnès set foot in Rijeka for the first time on the 11th of April 1942, the Chardonnet method had been completely superseded by other processes, such as the viscose method. Instead of nitric acid and cotton, here wood pulp was dissolved in caustic soda and dried to produce white sheets of cellulose, which are shredded and left to age with the help of oxygen. After aging, the white crumb is mixed with carbon disulfide and dissolved in another caustic solution to produce a thick yellow gloop, giving rise to the name of viscose. This dangerous viscous mixture would then be forced through thin glass tubes with gold or platinum spinnerets at the end and through a vat of sulfuric acid. The sulfuric acid hardens our gloopy mixture and ensures the long, thin filaments stay that way. After the acid, the viscose filament enters a spinning cast iron drum, and the viscose cakes that result can then be spun onto spools and processed further. If we force the viscous gloop through a thin slit rather than glass tubes and spinnerets with small holes, we get cellophane instead. And while caustic soda and sulfuric acid are both highly caustic and can cause some nasty burns and damage to the lungs, it is that sneaky carbon disulfide that does the most damage. In nature, it is only found in small amounts in marshes or during volcanic eruptions, but we found ways of making it by heating first coal and pyrite together and later pure carbon and sulfur. There is no good way of saying this, so I'll just come right out with it. The only reason we know so much about how dangerous carbon disulfide and many other chemicals are is because of people like Agnès, her colleagues, and especially many other factory workers who have had to handle large quantities of chemicals almost or entirely unprotected. When she first enters the factory, Agnès is set to spin the cakes that come out of the machines onto spools. She talks about how it is not very difficult, but it is thirsty work, as a significant amount of fiber from the cakes come free in the spooling process and gets inhaled by the workers. Agnès also writes about how she finds ways to sabotage the process at every opportunity, never once forgetting where she is. With the spools, she learns that only flat weaver's knots may be used, as bulkier knots causes the machinery to seize up. Knowing this, she fills her spools with bulky knots on the inside while tying the correct knots on the outside. But in the dining hall, where they take their meals, Agnès often sees a different kind of worker, Belgian and Dutch men who work further inside the factory with the production of the cakes they spool. She writes, "Their prison overalls are in tatters, eaten away by the acid. Their hands are bandaged and they appear to be suffering terribly with their eyes, to the point where they often can't manage by themselves. A fellow worker will hold them by the arm, sit them down, put their spoon in their hand. They appear to be racked by excruciating pains. What sort of work can this be that causes such torment?" So terrible are the effects of this work that within the next 4 months, practically all the free paid workers have left, leaving nearly all the work to forced and unskilled laborers like Agnès. And they have to learn quickly. With little to no training or protective gear, they are asked to remove the cakes at the bottom of the machine before it starts again, or be the one to grab hold of the solidified viscose filament as it comes out of the sulfuric acid and fling it into the funnel that stretches the viscose into fibers and into the spinning cast iron vat, where it forms the telltale cakes or skeins, still riddled with traces of acid. It is very dangerous work. They learn to fear the molten viscose, which may splatter and hit them, impossible to get off, and so caustic that it keeps going until it reaches bone. They aren't told what they are working with or how dangerous it is, but they see the effects. Their friends fall over into epileptic fits, people have heart attacks, Agnès herself loses track of how many times she passes out, they lose their sense of direction, and their eyes are in constant agony at varying stages of blindness, topped, of course, by their many chemical burns and constantly blistered hands. Carbon disulfide is a neurotoxin, meaning it does damage to the nervous system, which controls just about everything. It harms the eyes, the kidneys, blood, heart, liver, nerves, and skin. It causes a large number of workers to be admitted into mental institutions for insanity. In a rayon factory in Delaware, hundreds of miles away, Delaware Rayon claimed that the workers were only exposed to small amounts of carbon disulfide, but a testimony from one of the foremen indicates an environment so saturated with carbon disulfide that it condensed in the rafters and dripped down on the workers like rain. Policymakers were hesitant to step in, though, as the post-Depression era had ushered in an enormous boom and demand for rayon. One of the few to fight their case was Dr. Alice Hamilton, who was not allowed access to the rayon plant, no matter how hard she tried, but nevertheless managed to build a case for compensation for workers and stricter safety regulations by scouring the records of mental health patients admitted in the area. And we see instances of the insanity brought on by carbon disulfide in Agnès' memoirs as well. Adrian, a young prisoner of war, goes into a blind rage as one of the overseers insults him a little louder than usual. Agnès sees this as the young man trying to protect them all from the abuse they suffer, but with the knowledge of hindsight, it is likely that a brain addled by carbon disulfide played a part as well. And if you thought this chemical is surely so dangerous that it is no longer in use today, I really hate to disappoint you. The viscose process, as it is known, is still the most common way of producing viscose today. We still see reports of women giving birth to children with birth defects when working at or living close to viscose factories. And as usual, what is bad for us is more often than not bad for the environment too. That doesn't mean that the viscose in your wardrobe is necessarily dangerous, though. With both the raw material and end product being cellulose, viscose is, in theory, biodegradable. Nature knows what to do with cellulose already, so unless the dyes or other treatments make things difficult, it should go back to Earth in a timely fashion. There are even processes that, again, since viscose is just cellulose and the raw material for viscose is also cellulose, it is possible to recycle old garments into new by going through the entire dissolving and re-solidifying process all over again. The challenge, as I also discussed in my video about the challenges of textile recycling, is that it needs to be pure viscose, without any buttons, zippers, or other fibers in the mix. And since viscose fibers mix so readily with other fibers and help bring the cost down that way, that is often not the case. With viscose, the problem is not so much the product, but the process that makes it, and where all those chemicals go after they have been used. It's the air and the waterways close to the factory. It always is. Another problem that we cannot ignore is where the raw material comes from. With traditional viscose, the most common raw material is wood pulp. Another growing market is to use fast-growing bamboo, which is often just labeled as bamboo on your garment tag and sold as an eco-friendly alternative. But that is just viscose too, and there are reports of huge swathes of native forest being cut down, replaced with bamboo groves, and the viscose produced at the other end glaringly, and in my opinion misleadingly, being labeled as sustainable. And even if it isn't bamboo being planted, the destruction looks very similar. Native forests, often including endangered trees, are cut down, used for production, and the monocultures of pulp trees are grown instead. This is so bad that some estimates put the use of endangered and ancient forests in the viscose and rayon industry at a whopping 30% of the more than 300 million trees cut down every year to feed the industry alone. To add insult to injury, the organization Canopy estimates that 70% of the tree is wasted in the initial stages of viscose production. We are not the only ones seeing that there are big environmental hazards here, though. There are some slightly better, but naturally more expensive, viscose fabrics on the market. The biggest ones are modal and lyocell, the latter also known as tencel. The lyocell process was developed in 1972 and does not use carbon disulfide, but instead N-methylmorpholine N oxide. This chemical is recycled and reused at a rate of 99%, which of course helps immensely, but it is still a very energy-intensive process and it doesn't address the deforestation issue at all. I'm starting to feel a bit like a broken record at this point, but it comes back to the same thing time and time again, doesn't it? We cannot consume our way out of the problem. Did you know that there are enough clothes in the world that have already been produced that if we share it as bodies grow and change and buy used, it could potentially clothe us for several generations to come? Some estimates claim that it could clothe us for at least 6 generations or 100 years without churning out a single new garment. There are, of course, challenges to this, I would say, such as varying accessibility and the quality of clothes plummeting in the last decades. But the sentiment still stands. There are so many clothes in the world already, even if companies do their best to destroy unsold goods that could have been donated and been put to good use. As for Agnès, her story did not end with the suffering at the rayon factory. On August 22, 1943, 16 months after she arrived, Reka was bombed, to much jubilation from its inmates. They continued to be hired out as forced labor, but nowhere was as horrifying to them as the abuse or toxic chemicals they were exposed to while making rayon. On the 4th of April 1945, the town Agnès and several other prisoners had been taken to was liberated. She surprises everyone yet again by rallying forces with her friend Madeleine, and together they organized lodgings, medical care and soup kitchens for everyone. She also immediately started writing down what had happened during the time she had no diary, and her memoirs from the war were published in France already in 1946, making it unusual in that most of these memoirs are published decades after their time, but this was still raw from the experience. A very special thank you for this video goes to my patrons, many of whom wait so terribly patiently for these research deep dives. A special thank you also to Kassia St. Clair, whose glorious book, The Golden Thread, piqued my interest in the history of viscose to begin with. Thank you also to Barbara Mellor, who translated Agnès Humbert's gripping memoirs to English so that more of us can enjoy her almost surprisingly witty storytelling, especially considering the situation she was put in. That and all other references used for this video can of course be found in the description. Bye!